Hello everyone. Thank you all very, very much for coming. As Peter Till, Chairman of the EEA, has just said, I am Ufi Ibrahim. I am the Chief Executive of the Energy and Environment Alliance, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this, our inaugural conference. The lack of robust and universally common standards makes it impossible for industries such as our own to be able to distinguish between leaders and the laggards. Self-governing and focusing on the what are no longer enough. Industries like ours must focus on rigor, robustness, transparency, and the how, embracing the entire value chain and the whole life cycle. Now, collectively, we are all embarking on a journey we've not taken before. And that is why we created the Energy and Environment Alliance. We are a not-for-profit coalition of hospitality leaders, and we are working to establish common standards which are scientifically robust and commercially sustainable.
You don't need to be David Attenborough to understand the importance that nature plays in our lives. We take for granted of the air that we breathe. We take for granted all the other multi-benefits that nature provides us. So we use the natural power plants amplified to create cleaner air faster. So sustainability, as you will see, is not just an environmental pursuit, but it's actually a sustainable business model as well. If it doesn't make financial sense, it's not likely that we're going to do it. Nature is the ultimate entrepreneur. I find that it's worked out somehow to best exploit every opportunity to solve a problem without creating a waste product or a new problem in the process. Now, if our business practices were based on the way nature does business, then we would be closer aligned to a sustainable business model with a win-win outcome. I just want you to pause for one moment and realize that the air you're breathing here is produced by plants miles away, and your HVAC systems are bringing it into this space. And you invest a considerable amount into ventilation, yet it's not the ventilation producing the air, it's just pushing it around the building. So we rely on the natural services that plants provide to bring the air to us, and we take that for granted. If there was going to be a cost equated to it, it would be considerably higher than it is to maintain a ventilation system.
I think it's a rather important thing to remember that we are going for net zero and not zero, because you can't go for zero, because otherwise you could have no animals or human beings. We all actually breathe out emissions. And I do think that we ought to remember that, because it was historically true that the reason that human beings, and indeed the whole of the animal kingdom and most things that we value, were able to emerge on the earth was because the bushes and trees drew from the atmosphere a great deal of carbon and therefore reduced the heat. And as the heat was reduced, so various forms of life were able to emerge. And at the end of all that process came human beings. And the reason that that happened was there was a balance, the balance of nature, the balance between what is expelled and what is then sequestrated. And it is that balance that we have to recover, because what we have done is to expel a great deal more than nature can actually sequestrate, and also, of course, destroy much of the mechanism for sequestration. We've done both of those things. And that's why I particularly like the insight from Laudato Si, the Pope's great encyclical, when he says climate change is the symptom of what we've done to the world. And what one has to look at, therefore, is the disease. And the disease is a very simple disease. It is that we have pushed into the atmosphere an awful lot of that stuff that had been taken out in coal and gas, because that was, of course, what the trees and the bushes did with the carbon when they died. They, over the millennia, turned this into the coal and the gas and the oil which we have used. So we pushed all that back in. So it's not surprising that if it reduces the heat when you're taking it out, if you shove it back in, it increases the heat. Never understand how it is that people can be climate change deniers if you actually look at the very simple fact. It is the reverse of how we manage to live where we do. But that means that net zero is a crucial phrase, because both the zero and the net are important. Both the taking out of the carbon and the reduction of the amount of carbon that we put into the atmosphere have to come together. And what I've been fascinated about is the way in which over the last 2 years, even perhaps 18 months, the investment community has suddenly realized what sustainability is actually about. I first heard a definition of sustainability that really stuck in my mind from the chairman of Coca-Cola. My company has worked with Coca-Cola, Sancroft worked with Coca-Cola for many years. And the chairman of Coca-Cola said to me, "Look, John, my definition of sustainability is that we want to be here in 125 years like we've been here for the last 125 years. It's not a bad definition of sustainability. It is making it possible to have a serious future for our companies." And I've never understood why it has taken so long for investors to recognize that if you're thinking of buying a company, particularly if you're thinking of buying a company in one of those arrangements where you expect to sell it at a better price in 5 years' time, 4 years' time, the first thing you want to know is it sustainable? Is the structure of this business one where the management is not just thinking of the next quarter's results, but actually thinking about where are we going to be in 4 or 5 years' time, if not in 125 years' time? Unfortunately, that is not how investors have been guided up to now. But now, by a mixture of very good leadership in some of the best firms, and by the fact that the investors themselves are demanding that they have got sustainability, I think I prefer that word to ESG, because it sounds with ESG that there are 3 separate things, and they aren't separate. It is really about where we will be in 5, 10, 15, whatever period you want to look at time. And it seemed to me the one thing that we ought to be saying to people is that sustainability is not an add-on extra, a convenient addition, a matter of one's reputation. Sustainability is at the heart of a business that is going to be profitable. The connection between sustainability and profitability is absolute. And the reason for that is very simple. Sustainability is about moving towards running businesses, and I quote my predecessor, in the way that nature runs businesses. Nature makes good every piece of waste that it has. So I want to leave you with this concept of energy and the environment. We need energy. Of course we need energy. The revolution that has taken place in human beings' lives because of electricity, because of steam, is something so valuable that we shouldn't underestimate it. And I get very cross with those green campaigners who really think we'd be better off colder, never travelling, and not having electric light, because somehow or other that's more natural. It is a remarkable achievement by humankind that we have done that. But we have done it without thinking. And what we have to do is to start thinking. We have to do it and make sure that what we have is done without the damage which it once used to have. We now so dominate nature that we have the future of the planet in our hands. That's the difference. For the first time, a species has so controlled the world that it has the choice between continuance and destruction. And therefore we have to have two words in our minds, only two. The first is optimism, because we can do it. Optimism because it can be done. Optimism because it will be done. And the second is apocalypse, because that's what happens if we don't do it. And business has got to make sure that the voice of sensible, moderate, central people is listened to, rather than the few who are the outriders who don't want the change. I start off by the belief that we should make it more difficult to be bad, more expensive to be bad, and cheaper and easier to be good.
This morning we'll be discussing in our panel here whole life design and build. And the way we want to approach this is, given the kind of regulations and the transition of assets to net zero, it's moving on at a steady pace. So this morning the panel consider how we achieve this in terms of the built environment, building from conception, design to construction and operations.
One of the biggest challenges we had was trying to really find the expertise that we needed to try and deliver on the vision we had, to effectively try and make sure the business we were building would safeguard the environment as best as possible. So about 3 years ago, I had a big personal wake-up call where I realised the critical nature of sustainability and the importance of what we all need to do to deliver to it. And it was going to our professional teams and asking them to really stretch their imagination and lift the lids on what they thought was possible as well, to try and deliver the best physical building we could for an energy performance. Last year, Lamington Group, the real estate business, which is 55 years old, launched its roadmap to net zero. So that committed us to deliver or change the 55-year-old legacy business and all future assets to net zero by 2030. And we made some commitments in there, some of them being absolute reductions of 46% over the next 10 years, but also to only build whole life net zero hotels. That's the only way which we could deliver on a roadmap. So we made a commitment to only to build that way, and all our future assets are being brought to that specification, and we have a pipeline or ambition of 5,000 rooms by 2030. And we're the first hotel company in the world to set that vision, and I think it's almost the minimum benchmark that we should be delivering to actually to try and fight climate change. Shortly after, we opened at the back end of last year Room 2 Chiswick, and that's the world's first whole life net zero hotel. And whole life really is, knows it's operational and embodied carbon put together. And it was critical that we basically focus on not just operational carbon, which there are a lot of businesses who successfully do that, and then mitigate or reduce or rebalance their operational carbon. But we had to also look at the embodied, because with all our energy efficiencies that we'd made, the end product was that we were forecasting to be 90% of our entire footprint over the life cycle of the building, from construction through to deconstruction. 90% would be embodied carbon. So there's no way I could authentically say I thought we were doing our best, and we were really trying to mitigate the impacts of our business by not taking that into account.
So I was very fortunate. I would suggest that most of what we've achieved in the 8 years that I've been doing this has been very serendipitous. Perhaps we always think that people and great visions, big ideas are all driven by somebody, and just, wow, what a personality. It's more luck than judgment from my perspective, I can tell you. Those people who get what we're doing and then buy into that vision have actually made the opportunity to do things like this in this country fantastically real. Otherwise, it would just be me standing here and getting excited about telling you about a big pool. It's all that detail, though, that adds realism to it.
So basically, I built a greenhouse with rooms in it. And then even further, and that's even more important and made me very enthusiastic, because the building was built in a new area. And I started up a community, and it was a primary school. And the talking point of the greenhouse and the connectivity to explain what sustainability could be and what the added value of a building we call a hotel could be, an added value for the community there, was a great talking point. So I think my biggest achievement is being the greenhouse. And to get into specifically, we in the Netherlands are supposed to be the Silicon Valley of agriculture. So I really challenge them how to put on top of this very complicated building a greenhouse, and how does that become a sustainable greenhouse? I'm totally convinced that hospitality can be the key stakeholder in setting the stage of sustainability, because in the end, in my perception, hospitality is only about people, and our profit is in the people. So I think I'm always very afraid that we only talk about technique and buildings, but I think we should talk about people. I want to add to that if I oversee this audience, I'm very happy to see that it's almost 50-50 male-female. And I think one of the most important stakeholders who should be here the next time is the new generation, the next generation, because we're doing it for them.
As a research analyst, normally I would be looking at growth, recovery of the industry after the pandemic, growth going forwards, margins, etc. But actually, ESG and sustainability is increasingly important. The reasons for this are obviously the guest perceptions and demands, the ability to attract financing, and importantly for public equities, the fund flows. In the UK, depending on the month you look at, anywhere between 2/3 and 90% of fund flows are into ESG funds. So it's important and critical for attracting capital. IHG say that 60% of RFPs for business travel insist on pulling through the emissions information of the hotels. Everyone should look at what the online travel agents and the corporate travel bookers are trying to do to put more information about the emissions and footprint of travel in front of their guests. That's you and I, and I think this will form part of our decision making around travel in the future, and so we need to. You can watch this to assess the speed at which travelers' interests are changing and companies' interests are changing.
But what we're seeing is this gradual shift from energy as a cost center into energy as an asset. And it's using the building fabrics, it's using the assets within the building and using that to drive profitability. And it's about creating revenues from those electrical assets that are in situ. So it's a real shift from being kind of fearful of what the energy and the legislation and compliance will bring to embracing that opportunity. I'm thinking about how we embed that in the core business to drive profitability. Again, just that embedding of and making it centric and core business of the energy and sustainability initiatives, and that using that then to drive their core business, whether it be profitability, market share, improving customer experience, brand reputation, all those things are kind of intrinsically linked into that energy asset piece.
Knowing what's changing in terms of legislation is critical, and having a team to enable you to get access to this information, people should remember, is the gains that they can make through energy programs. So we've got plenty of examples of hotels that can save 25% of their operational energy costs through change programs, better management of the BMS, heating, cooling. So in some cases, not significant investment. And then you throw a CHP into that. If it's appropriate, you're potentially up to 60-70% cost. So in terms of the value of your hotel and the cost of energy prices today, then it's an investment into your exit value.
It could be anything from reusing the energy that's going out of an extract, for instance, and putting that back into operation and not burning more energy, unnecessarily, or controlling and putting more automated controls within, say, the kitchen, taking away that human factor, and it's about this wastage thing and energy consumption. That the marginal gains, if we can tackle that over a period of time across various assets, the picture will look a lot better.
Wall, for example, something I experience with, has it's considered a luxury finish. It's not necessarily a cheap cladding, and it's quite beautiful. And people are concerned about the energy and water consumption and the exchange. However, a little story about M&S years ago, they enveloped one of their large buildings with a significantly sized living wall. And they found, surprisingly, that they saved an enormous amount of energy in heating up the building in the winter. And that was primarily because overnight, the building would drop 9 degrees lose 9 degrees overnight, and then they'd have to heat that up each morning. Once the living wall was installed, it dropped 1.5 degree overnight on average, which was a lot less energy required to then reheat the building. Now, something like that is a significant saving on a luxury cladding. And if you use that kind of logic to offset other luxuries within a hotel, for example, then you can justify maybe having a spa or a luxury, any other luxury, but because you're offsetting energy in another area. So aligning policy in the right direction to make it easier to make the right decisions and incentivize people that way, and not put a whole lot of legislation and limiting paperwork to make it more difficult to create something sustainable and beautiful.
So coming on to the business opportunity of sustainability, I mean, from my perspective, over the last year and a half, I'd say I've seen the whole landscape completely shift. People, previously were talking about the cost uplift of sustainability measures. I do use the word ESG or acronym ESG. Apologies, Lord Deben, sometimes as well, but sustainability here. We have seen that completely flip over now.
I know that our biggest single variable cost is actually our people and the hours and time and expenditures invested in people. And if we don't get good returns on that because they're focused on the wrong things, because we don't give them the information, the knowledge, the understanding, they'll make the wrong decisions, and that will not be healthy for my business.
And so even though the lenders aren't attributing credit just now, I think the movement in the hotel industry is actually already there. And by the time we have this set of measurable standards, you'll be able to go to lenders and say with confidence, we actually can demonstrate that these are our social values and we do meet them. So whilst we don't get the credit today, we will get the credit going forward. I think hotels inevitably, by the nature of their business, being permanent real estate assets in communities, they do naturally contribute to the economy of a community, and it's extremely positive. Maybe around the PR, maybe because the hotel industry, whilst you do have the big brands, it's actually quite a fragmented industry as well. And maybe we don't shout loudly enough about it because there needs to be a little bit more coordination in that sense. But I think as a sector, we do perform pretty well.
One of the things that I've noticed, because we work very much with the younger generation as well in terms of educating, inspiring them, is those who are wanting to go into this industry are all looking at sustainability. They're all talking about social impact. They're all talking about community and how they can integrate the work that they're doing within the community. So I think that there will be pressure from the top that starts to come down, especially with the CMA publishing the Green Claims Code, which is all about no more greenwashing, you have to be doing what you're doing. And within that as well, there is looking at the social side of things. But I think also the new future leaders that come into this industry are very much going to be making sure that it is focused on the S as well for themselves, but also to make sure that the customer experience is as amazing as it could be in terms of, brand and loyalty and expectation. And I think also just to build on that, it's about building social currency towards brand loyalty. With all the greenwashing that's happening out there, having something that's really, really robust, that's really holding people up in terms of accountability and responsibility, I think it will become a unique selling point.
But it's interesting, I think we are all aware, if you look at any ESG framework, the social element is always the element that's least described and least mandated in terms of the metrics and the targets that you can set yourselves. And there's a reason for that, because it's harder to measure social impact. And I think what's really important is that each individual business needs to understand what the risks are so that they can start to talk about those risks and then to feed into a sectoral dialogue. What are those risks and how can we start to address those risks and measure them collaboratively? And that's certainly what we've done for many years in the fashion industry, and it's happening, I think, in hospitality, but it's happening in pockets and actually could be much more amplified. The EEA and BREEAM and USAR are looking to develop the social measurement side of the tool, and we are setting up a social impact committee. So we're really interested to hear from anybody in the room who feels that they have value to add within that discussion about how we can measure risk and issues and also social value in terms of the hospitality sector.
Hospitality is one of the few industries where you can start at the very bottom and end up at the very top. And you can do it by hard work. You can gain your qualifications on the way. And that's quite unusual compared with other industry sectors. And I think if we had a metric to track that, we might well be able to showcase how well hospitality is doing.
That actually we employ an awful lot of people. We have low barriers to entry. We help them progress. We add value. We create sustainable businesses. This is going back decades. So it is the case. We've got a positive case to make in terms of the speed of progress and access, as I said, to local resources that we train and invest in order to help progress our businesses.
In the present day, I don't think we've seen a premium in value on sustainable hotels, but I think that's very much present day. I think it's certainly the tide is shifting, and I think it's more important than ever actually to be forward thinking and to react to this change and to de-risk and future-proof your asset, because we've all seen the fluctuations in fossil fuel prices. We've seen utility prices and the impact that has on your operating costs. I think there's greater regulation. I think Max and I were talking about the regulation that's coming through in the coming years, and those tighter environmental regulations are only going to increase the costs of existing hotels that don't react. The cost of decarbonizing is only going to increase. And I think going forward, all of these, if you're not reacting, if you're not reacting, that will be reflected in the value, and that will cause challenges in your value. It's for those assets that are thinking ahead and anticipating this change, that will then, in my opinion, in the next 5-10 years, be reflected in future high valuations. Hotels is a customer-centric business. So if anything, I think we are reacting to what our consumers are also telling us. So I think if you're not considering it, then I think it is a risk. Ultimately, investors want to future-proof their future income streams, their future asset values, and ultimately we are going to be driven by our customer demands, which I think we've had some fantastic panels previously which talked exactly to that, and we're seeing more so than ever that the younger generations, the Gen Z consumers, are becoming more socially conscious, and actually their buying habits are being dictated by the social considerations. So I think it would be amiss to not consider this. I was looking in a data room yesterday, a JLL data room for a hotel opportunity, and it's the first time I've been into a data room where there is a specific section on ESG with a clear report that shows the sustainability credentials of that asset, talks about the cost of achieving certain carbon target, net zero carbon targets. And normally I remember the days when we would have access to a data room and we struggled even to find an EPC report. And now it's there front and center as one of the key headings in the data room. So it is something that is being considered. Ultimately, as we spoke earlier, it's about de-risking the opportunity and knowing, once we know up front what the potential costs are, if there are any cost of decarbonizing the assets, responding to environmental, tougher environmental regulations that are coming forward, that's all built into our appraisal and is something that we will consider when we explore any asset. I think we talked earlier about assets that could fail. It might sound somewhat predatory, but if you are going to not respond, I think you will fail, and that will also be an opportunity for investors, private offices, family offices who will see that as an opportunity. It may not be the institutional investors who will look at those assets, but that may also will be an opportunity for private investors to come in and buy some of these assets at a lower price to market and then invest the capital required to bring it back up to standard.
You might set a target net zero by 2050, 2040, 2030. Fine, but we all need to work from this year to the next, the following year after this. How do we work together collaboratively to demonstrate those meaningful, sometimes small, but changes that work towards a better future? Because really it's about collaboration and having a shared goal and a shared vision towards better sustainability performance, more responsible asset management, and generally a more sustainable future. I think the implications of waiting is that you run the risk of falling behind. And one of the comments earlier that came up was it's about trust. So how do we demonstrate as an asset manager to our investors how we're taking those steps? Perhaps we might have data coverage on, 50% of buildings today. That's fine. but our goal is to get to 60 tomorrow. We might have 5% reduction in our energy this year. Maybe we have 2% next year. But show the steps that we're taking. And it's about building that trust, which builds on the confidence in our brand, our purpose, and our vision towards those sustainability objectives. And as a pure investor perspective, it's about capital raising, getting investors on board with us with a shared vision towards more sustainable futures. Because as we look in the institutional space, institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies are looking for investors to partner with who have these sustainability goals in mind, who can demonstrate the progress that's being made. So it's fundamental to how we operate as an organization, but also in identifying our operators and our partners that they have these shared goals too. So we work together and we can have some positive outcomes like this.
The risk of getting it wrong, you can look at it from the aspect of the asset, and actually if you don't do enough, or you don't pay attention to it enough, or you don't plan for future investment in your asset, you could have the risk of an obsolete asset in the future. And by that I mean it costs you more to do the work to it, to make it more sustainable, that actually the market doesn't place a value on that asset any longer. Certainly within HSBC, we financed the King's Cross development, office development there, which was state-of-the-art green buildings, and that attracted the tenant Facebook to take both of those buildings. And you know, that really kind of shows that they can easily get lettings on grade A offices that are built to those kind of BREEAM standards. And that's going to play through into the hotel sector. It's a natural kind of evolution. I completely agree with you. We're not seeing it in terms of the investment market yet, but the fact that we're all here and talking about it shows that that is coming. It's inevitable that when you're looking to trade assets in the future, those kind of questions are being asked. They're being asked certainly by banks. Of all the new business that we do, we want to know not necessarily what you have done, because we recognise everybody is learning and you've got different sorts of assets that will be further ahead with their plans, and different sorts of companies that we lend to. But it's about making sure that that is front and a focus for the future of what you're planning to do. And we've got a whole team that we've invested in within HSBC to work with customers to make sure that that conversation is front and centre, and that we are supporting our customers on that transition as well. So introducing and working with you so that you've got access to independent verification and to make your property more sustainable for the future. So it's going to facilitate transactions in the market, basically, through that transparency. So from a lending perspective, it's really about sharing data. And this is a theme, again, that we've heard throughout the morning. And data that is independently verified and enables that transparency throughout the sector. And this will hopefully enable different types of lending products to be available. At the moment, HSBC provides green loans, which are really kind of focused when you've got a big development project or CAPEX type project. But where we really need to get to is providing sustainability linked loans into the hotel sector, which help existing businesses transition their entire business to net zero. We're committed to doing it, but we don't have enough data out there in which to measure against. So I think that's why data underpins all of this.
What about if we talk a bit about liquidity, because that's also a big question that comes up amongst asset owners, investors, just saying, okay, well, what if I cannot sell my asset? What does the buyer pool look like? And we've got the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, which looks at net zero carbon by 2050. How far is the asset from an operational perspective from achieving that? And in some instances, the asset is considered to be stranded, where it will not hit that net zero carbon 50. And I think it's also about answering as much as we can up front, because when investors are looking at opportunities now, they're looking at it from a sustainability perspective. What is the energy performance of this asset? What are the skeletons in the closet? What are the things that I can raise later on? And that could potentially be a price chip. So what we're now seeing is that actually investors are starting to behave differently by addressing these points up front. Have they done a net zero carbon analysis of the asset? Have they looked at, what measures can be implemented? And they may not necessarily be high CAPEX. It could be low CAPEX, but actually it has quite a big impact on the carbon intensity of the asset. So there's a lot that can be done, but we're obviously still at very nascent stages of that. But for sure, it's a time of opportunity, because that could be used to identify assets where there's a dislocation in price and picked up at a good price, and then to get them future-proofed from a sustainability perspective. At JLL, we're seeing investors ask a lot of questions. So they'll look at a hotel acquisition and they will say, okay, is it EU taxonomy compliant? And they will ask that question. And later on, it can be used as a point of negotiation. And it's important to understand what are we talking about when we talk about EU taxonomy in the context of hotels. So it's important to understand the impact, because we're in the real estate sector, and obviously real estate contributes 40% to carbon emissions globally. And that is something that we need to think about. So the sustainability acquisition checklist would consider that. They would consider regulation compliance with the legislation and how far off the asset might be from net zero carbon.
I think for all of us up here, our key function, our key responsibility, our number one raison d'etre, the reason we're there, is to protect the business. That is why companies employ lawyers. We're there to protect the business. What that generally leads to is a tension, particularly if, like myself, you work in a business which is very creative-led, brand-led, design-led. You often end up being the fun police, and that's a function of the role. Now, with sustainability, actually, in my experience, it's almost slightly inverted, because the business recognizes that as the lawyer, you sit in a very unique position where you can be their champion. You are the one contracting with project managers, with contractors, with members of the supply chain. So you are actually the one who can go into bat for the business and ensure that, as Ufi said, it's not a joined up framework, but that the legal requirements, the regulatory requirements, and also the codes of practice that the business itself sets, you are the one who can go into bat for the business to try and enforce those and get the supply chain to adhere to those. I mean, now being sort of squarely on the owner side, I think it's very much about ensuring that on all our construction and development projects, we're getting our sort of green clauses in our standard terms. Obviously, the EEA is doing some really good work on sort of updating what those clauses should look like and making sure that they're future-proof and addressing the needs of modern hospitality businesses. So really, that's where my focus is for
No, that's an excellent point to make, actually, because all of us who are involved in the EEA are committed on this panel in particular, and the wider group, to greening up, for want of a better expression, of a whole number of legal documents. And my own particular brief from Ufi and from Nadia is to look at hotel management contracts and franchise agreements. But there's work going on across the entire spectrum of the legal documents, and construction documents, of course, are one of the key focus areas.
It's doing the right thing and taking the right actions and being proactive, because, as we see everybody here today, this is an active topic that we have to work on, and we have to do a lot to get to
seeing
that.
results.
And so we focused on assets and energy this year. They are the two. We are also going to roll out we're looking at sustainability superstars, if you like, around the within the hotels, people who've got an interest in this, maybe students, but that is going to be launched this year, and they will do the on the ground, if you like, getting the message out, because it's part of the hotel operation as well.
I think as we move away from the softer CSR world towards ESG, we really need to make sure that we have a data-driven process with measurable measurable targets. The first is just working with our external auditor, and then obviously taking that data and using it to update our brand standards where we can, being realistic, of course. And then another thing Yotel's really focused on this year is our diversity and inclusion policy, and we're actually putting in place a new survey, because that's something that's very important to us as a brand as well. So we need to focus on those two things this year.
Well, this year is the year that we plan to publish our first ESG report. So we have, published a little bit.
When is it coming out?
End
We'll
of
make a
June.
diary note. End of June, everyone.
So what we're working on now is really taking stock of all of the sustainability that we've done over the years on the various areas of ESG, and doing a SWOT analysis. Where are we? Where do we want to be? And so we're going to produce this report which we'll publish at the end of June. I've now said it publicly.
It's got to happen now.
It's really going to happen now. And what we really want to do there is I think we'll be proud of what we publish and proud to see the achievements, and we've been measuring them for a while. So I think we'll be able to really be proud of that. But then what we need to do, echoing what everything that's been said today, is that sustainability is a journey. So we then need to set our targets and just improve year on year and just get better and better. Well, and another way is also putting in place a supplier code of conduct, right? And so actually I'm working with the CEO of our procurement company, Kempinski Trading, on putting in place that supplier code of conduct.
The EEA's mission statement includes a commitment to ESG proofing, legal agreements, corporate disclosure, and governance statements. This is an opportunity for in-house lawyers in particular to go beyond being guardians of compliance, to help drive ESG through strategy in their businesses. In-house lawyers may be tempted to simply red pen their existing contracts to give them an ESG focus, but there are internal and external challenges. That's a really, really important point you've made. It's someone picked up earlier on as well about measurement, because there's been a lot at the moment of, right, let's tick all these boxes. Do we do this? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That's fantastic. But how do you measure your success? How do you know it's working? You have to know, I guess, what working means for you. But I think that's definitely a very important part of what we need to do, isn't it?
The hotel industry, as we've all been hearing, does not have an agreed set of standardized ways of measuring how we get to ESG, what is zero carbon footprint, and how does that journey look like. That has an impact on everybody involved in terms of people who want to lend money, people who want to invest money, suppliers, regulators, and of course guests. And from all directions, the pressure for hotel companies to be able to show their credentials is going to increase over time, both from suppliers of money for projects and of course from guests themselves. And the big goal that we have is to establish these global standards for what we're trying to do. This is something that BREEAM has been doing successfully for decades with commercial properties, and they are the global leaders in this. They therefore have the technology and the methodology already in place for commercial office buildings, et cetera, et cetera. They have been doing hotels for a number of years, but as we've heard from Al-Karim, from his experience, it is not yet specifically for hotels, but that is what we're working to achieve. So I guess the first thing, Shamir, is how do we get to that point? What do we have to do to alter your system so that it works best for hotels?
These guys really just coming together to say, actually, BREEAM's been doing hotels for a while. The scheme's been around for 30 odd years. How do we now really mobilize this entire sector where there's such great visionaries, such enthusiasm, and a desire to make change and long-lasting commitment to sustainability and ESG, as we've been hearing throughout today. But then to try and do something that we've never really done at scale within BREEAM before, to say, actually, we can take the entire sector, engage with the industry, and create a tailored version of BREEAM. I mean, that in itself is truly pioneering. And certainly in the years that we've been working together now, to really understand actually the complexities that many of you face day in, day out in terms of ownership models, owner-operator, we just heard about, franchisees, franchisors. It might have a particular brand on the front, but actually it's a different company and they've got a different brand down the road. And it's like, wow. And the scale and the size, you've got small hotels, you've got medium size, you've got bigger hotels, you've got restaurants, you've got saunas, you've got whatever else is going on. Actually, it's the spread that I find truly exciting. And the work that we're now starting with the EEA to really get involved. We've got technical working groups set up now to start to really understand the insights of many of you who've got direct input, experience, and knowledge of the sector to help influence and steer the language, the criteria, and some of the metrics that you were just talking about there, Peter, because I think it's absolutely critical. And the sense of urgency now across this sector particularly is just clearly why so many of you are here today, and no doubt many more will follow through in becoming members of the EEA in due course. And I think, come back to your point there, Peter, it is absolutely this moment to then say, we can start now. BREEAM is already existing. We've got many clients already have been using BREEAM, not just in the UK, but around the world. Green building certification across Europe, 80% of it is BREEAM. We're growing in the States, growing across Asia. So how do we make sure we are building on this momentum in a way that's going to give more benefit back to the EEA members to integrate this process? This is not a standalone, separate, tangential type of activity. It's got to be right for your organization and building into the fabric and ethos of what you do and how you do your business.